this is my body, like don't tell me what I can and can't do with it. And if I decide that I want to explore my sexuality, I want to be free to do that. And I can also do that while like using it to speak back and say, I can do that and I can make a statement by doing that.
Welcome, tribe. I'm Mayah Rose.
And I'm Gerald Rogers. We're about to embark on another mind-expanding episode where we dive deep into the realms of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
This is a transformational experience of healing, manifestation, increased clarity, flow, and alignment.
So join us on this sacred journey as we receive the codes of transformation from scientists and psychonauts, shamans, tantra masters, mystics, and more.
Together, we'll unravel the secrets of plant medicine, sex magic, and other tools to tap into higher states of consciousness.
So why are we here? To answer the call, to share our passions and be advocates for alternative healing.
So get ready for a ride that transcends the ordinary and leads you to the extraordinary, because living a legendary life is not just a choice.
It's a sacred adventure.
Hey, Pardis. I'm so excited to have you today, everybody. This is Pardis Mahdavi. She is my dear friend and soul sister. She was at a Burning Man camp this year, and she is literally one of my idols that I look up to as women. I don't know if that makes you feel uncomfortable or not, but this is all part of the sisterhood rising. Like we're looking up to each other. But one of the things I love about Pardis, I know you have a whole biography, that I could share. You have done so many incredible things in the world, but I want to share a micro moment from my life that can give you an example of what Pardis has done. And then we're going to dive in today talking about sex. So she actually wrote a book called Passionate Uprisings, Iran's Sexual Revolution, and quite the story around that book. So, but we're gonna save that for just a moment. But here's my micro moment with Pardis. So we got to know each other when you came to the Burning Man camp. I knew you had done some amazing things in the world. And you joined one of my groups that I'm doing for priestesses. And during this women's group, I wanted to spotlight you. And I remember the morning that I was going to spotlight you for the Q&A, I woke up and I had just been slammed with this unexpected tax bill from the IRS. And I was feeling overwhelmed and I was feeling sorry for myself. And I was like, life's so hard. I'm such a victim. And then I get on the Q&A with Pardis, and she is literally telling me how she has ridden through open gunfire with horse sperm to carry to the U.S. military to breed these certain horses, and how she was involved in a project with something that was able to basically kill all STDs, and then it was banned, and how she's worked in several universities, and how she was wrote her book and was actually, had some challenges around writing that book too. But she felt so passionate about sharing this uprising with these women in Iran. And I just got done, listening to that session with you and the Q&A. And I was like, wow, my problems definitely are very small considering the world's problems. And I was just so in awe of everything that you have done to help humanity and to help women and to really create and pave a new way of doing things. So anyway, you really, really inspired me. And I just really am excited to share you and your message with all of the people out there that are listening right now. So yeah, I would love to start.
That means so much to me, because I look up so much to you, and I just have felt so just so much love and acceptance from you. And when it was my first time at Burning Man, and when I joined the camp, you were just such an inviting and inspiring and inclusive, goddess. And I was like, oh my gosh, who's this amazing woman? And you held so much space for so many people going through so much, at Burning Man, and then after, in the group and all the work that you do. It's a real, it's just a real honor to be kind of in your community. So thank you. And thank you for having me on the show today. It's great.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited because I've been wanting to have this discussion with you for a long time. So I'm like, let's just do it live on the show. Let's talk about this. So I want to talk about sex and the sexual revolution and kind of why we've been suppressed and why it's important now to realize that sex is such an amazing tool to access these higher
Mhm.
states of consciousness. So, would love for you just to dive in whatever you feel called. If you want to share part of your journey, if you want to share like, hey, this is what we need to do. So, I
Yeah,
want you to lean on your intuition on this.
well, thank you, and we'll see kind of how our story unfolds and twists and turns. I always love watching like how does our magic happen together. So yeah, I mean, I started studying sexual revolution when I went back to Iran. So I'm Iranian American. My parents came here during the revolution. And, I grew up with a really complicated relationship to the homeland, right? Because, I grew up at a time, following Iran hostage crisis, Iran Contra, like rampant anti-Iranianism, you know, Islamophobia, you name it. I mean, it was all there. And so I had this very complicated relationship to Iran, because I was growing up in America, but I also had this very complicated relationship to sex. Because one of the things my parents wanted to do was really hold on to, the Iranian culture in America. So they said, yes, we are in America, but we don't, we want to hold on to the culture. And one aspect of the culture that they talked about was that, you know, um, good Iranian girls are not out there, exploring their sexuality. That was just that was something I got from the entire Iranian community. My parents over the years became a lot more open, but the Iranian community really, in California, in the United States, I mean, Tehrangeles, people call Los Angeles Tehrangeles. There's so many Iranians there. And they really like look down on, especially women embracing their sexuality. And so it was like, what is this relationship? And then I finally got to go to Iran in 1999, 2000. And it was in the summer of 2000 that I went. And, I had been working at the LA Times Magazine, and I wanted to write stories about the Iranian women's movement because I was so inspired by what these women were doing. And I got to Iran, and all anybody wanted to talk about was this sexual revolution. That's what they were like, we're having the sexual revolution. I'm like, what is that? That sounds amazing. And they're like, well, we'll take you in and we'll show you. And I got to Iran and people were having all kinds of sex, and I was like, wow. First of all, I've been lied to about my culture 'cause I had all this like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have sex. That'll make me less Iranian. But they were also having all kinds of sex and were thinking about it in very political ways. And so what they were telling me was, look, the regime, the mullahs, the regime in Iran, they came to power under this fabric of morality, right? They came to power during the Iranian Revolution by saying, look, Iran has become too West toxicated, too infatuated and intoxicated with the West. And their like label for their litmus test for that was like, look, women are wearing mini skirts, they're out with men. And so the regime came to power under like the campaign of like restoring morality. And that's like your first clue as to the power of sex. If there can be an entire revolution, if people are so threatened by women having sex, by anyone having sex, but if people are so threatened that they're willing to cause bloodshed and overtake a country, that's a pretty good first clue as to how powerful sex is, right? Because, they were afraid that if you fully live into and breathe into this, that you will access the superconscious that will make you rise, right? That will actually, unlock and unleash the power of a population, right? I mean, that is the power of sex. And they were so threatened by that they caused an entire bloody revolution. And they came to power. And what was the first thing that the mullahs did when they came to power? They enacted mandatory veiling laws such that women would have to cover their entire bodies. So no hair, no curves, like everything had to be covered. That right? So that like, sex is now being legislated, right? I mean, that's pretty intense. And so you had an entire generation, my generation, were called children of the revolution. Our kids' generation is my kids are the children of the resistance, which we'll get to in a minute. But, we were the children of the revolution. And my generation was like, wait a second, we're not buying this because you have this regime that comes to power on a fabric of morality. And just to give you an example that I think might resonate with your listeners, I had this interviewee and he said to me, you know, they had a very high unemployment, really bad traffic. They had all these issues in Iran. But instead of sitting around and figuring out how to fix unemployment or traffic, the mullahs sat around and they came up with this law, and you'll love this law. They created a law that said if there was an earthquake and a man from an upstairs apartment were to fall into a woman from a downstairs apartment and she got pregnant, that the child would not be a bastard because it would be an act of God. And I'm like,
What? What?
so, like, who does it? Like, come on. Like, Maya Rose. Like, who is sitting around thinking of these laws? Right? Like, come on. I mean, but that just goes to show you how much of their time they were spending thinking about sex, right? And the young people, at the time, is 2000, right? They had figured that out. They're like, oh my gosh, these people are so threatened by sex. That is our secret weapon. We are going to gradually chip away at the power of the regime through using our bodies to speak back and through engaging in that most dangerous of things, which is engaging in sexual, activities and really doubling down on sexuality, and so that you can unlock, right, the superconscious, as you say, and harnessing power from that. And so they were like, look, if this is a regime that came to power under a fabric of morality, we're going to chip away at the power and of the regime by gradually chipping away at that fabric by using our bodies to speak back. And I was like, this is brilliant, right? This is exactly, this just shows you the power of sex and the complicated nature of it. And so here you had an entire generation of people growing up under what we would consider a very oppressive regime, finding liberation in sex. And I'm like, that's powerful. That's really beautiful. And that's what became the subject of my PhD dissertation. And then it became my first book.
Wow. Well, I want to dive deeper into this in a moment, but first of all, I just want to presence. Thank you for doing that work and for really noticing and bringing to light some of the things that were going on. And it's so fascinating to me. I mean, sex has to be so powerful because it's been so controlled for so long. And like the misinterpretations and the way things have been twisted, and it's so bad and it's so wrong and you can't do it. And I know I went through this even in my own life. I grew up in a very high demand religion. And then when I was coming out of that religion, my question was, what do I do with my body? Like there was so much guilt and shame. And when I was able to release that and let it go, I actually realized how powerful this tool of sexuality was, for good and for bad. And I think that this is the interesting thing is we try and use this control around sexuality, with religion or with culture or with, regimes or whatever. And then there's this revolution, but it almost goes to the other side. And now it's like, wait, what am I using my body for? Am I using this for a power control, or am I really using it for my own good and intention? And this is such a fascinating topic, and I want to dive deeper into that. But in my own evolution, even up till recently, there was this feeling as a woman like, don't tell me what to do with my body. Like, this is my body and I get to choose what to do with it. And I'm feeling strangely emotional even talking about this. But really, a lot of what we're talking about here is especially women, also men recognizing this, but for women to step up and say, no, this isn't okay. You cannot tell me what I get to do with my body. And so feeling into that with the sexual revolution and And it's really and truly is a struggle. If you're listening and you've never felt that way, I can tell you millions of women have. And there's so much power in the reclamation of our sexual sovereignty and being able to choose what we get to do with our bodies and things like cosmic orgasms and sacred union and strengthening ka bodies. And there's so many beautiful things in that. But yeah, I would love to yeah, just hear your thoughts on that generally and what you discovered in your book.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just and I love what you're saying because that, resonates with me too. Is I've always had that strong feeling like this is my body, like don't tell me what I can and can't do with it. And if I decide that I want to explore my sexuality, I want to be free to do that. And I can also do that while like using it to speak back and say, I can do that and I can make a statement by doing that, which I thought was so interesting what was happening there. But I want to pick up too on your excellent point about, fear, guilt, and shame. And I think, this is where like sex and the superconscious, like I think to your point, like sex has the power of unlocking the superconscious, but I also think we have to be really intentional about our spiritual work and our work in the superconscious, right? We have to be super intentional about that because that is what allows us to also feel into our sexuality. So one of the things that and I've, I've since written 8 books and I've been, working in this field for 24 years now. And one of the things that I hear all the time is, look, people will tell me when I'm interviewing them, they're like, Pardis, like, most modern day religions and the state, the most majority religions and government states, most modern day religions and states don't give us any tools or disciplines for dealing with fear, shame, or anger. They don't. In fact, they trade on it, right? And that was one of the frustrations that, a lot of my interlocutors in Iran and throughout the Middle East, as I did my field work throughout the Middle East, would say, like, this doesn't make sense. These are religions or state forces that are trading on fear, guilt, and shame, which are the most oppressive forces. We need a way to deal with, to combat fear, guilt, and shame so that we can be free. And so sex kind of comes in there as a way, sex and intimacy, really. There's this whole notion of, there's an anthropologist, sociologist and anthropologist, Ken Plummer, Gary Dowsett, people who have written on this topic of intimate citizenship. And intimate citizenship is this idea that in the absence of the ability to negotiate the self, right, to negotiate who you are vis-a-vis the state or religion, people turn to the realm of the intimate to negotiate who they are, right? And so, without these guiding principles, that give us the tools to really be free and to live into our fullest expression of ourselves, we have to tap into the superconscious. We have to tap into the different layers of the self in order to get free. And so part of that is, how do you tap into that enough so that you're so free to enhance and embrace and experience all the magic of sex that you talk about, that you were, cosmic orgasms and that all of the sex magic, right? To be free to do that. And we know that the sex magic also unlocks your superconscious. So it's like, it's kind of it's like they're a constant dance, just like a couple is. It's a constant dance together. And it's like a kind of a higher level of intimacy, if you will. Like you find yourself in and through, intersubjective relationships with different partners, with different sexual experiences, with yourself and others. And you then level that up and say, okay, what's the relationship between the world of the intimate and the world of the superconscious? And how are they constantly feeding each other to help unlock rather than being an instrument of oppression and an instrument of unfreedom for women around the world?
Yeah, I agree. And there's some things I want to get your take on because this has been really fascinating for me to watch. And as I've done different work with women's circles and priestess codes and studied, what really went on millennia ago. Like, how did women connect with the superconscious? What was their true power? And a lot had to do with sex magic. And it didn't always have to do with intercourse, but it was moving the sexual energy. Like that's how women, that's how we alchemize, that's how we transmute, that's how it's done. But then there's been so much shame around this. But there's a couple ideas. First of all, I just want to say for me, uh, true intimacy, sexuality, orgasm is the best way for me to access the superconscious. And this is why, we call this podcast Psychedelic Sex in the Superconscious. I mean, of course, you can do that through psychedelics. You can do it through breath work. You can do it through sound baths. You can do it through all these different things. But for me, I just, that's the one that I am most likely to use. That's the one I like the best. And there have been miracles happen. I mean, unexplainable things where there's no other way to explain it other than I've gone to the superconscious. I think I was telling you this story at Burning Man, but just to recap real quick for anybody on here that hasn't heard this story is one time Gerald and I were having this intimate experience. And really in order to have this superconscious experience, you have to let go of guilt and shame. You have to be with somebody who you fully trust. You have to surrender in your body. You have to be able to understand it. I teach whole courses on this, but I'm in this moment. I have this extreme orgasm. I have a DMT released in my brain. This actually happens. And poof, I'm nothing, no one, nowhere. And all of a sudden, everyone, everything, everywhere. And I open my eyes and it's not even a thought of it. I said, Gerald, we need to go to California with your brother, Clint, who was, by the way, is a master healer and has something to do with Michael Beckwith. Now, at the time, it was COVID and I was running Global Healers Summit and I was wanting to gather all these healers together. I didn't know Michael Beckwith, but I thought, well, maybe, be awesome. He could speak on this event. And Gerald said, well, a couple problems. First of all, Clint's in India and the border's closed. This is COVID. Secondly, he's in 30 days of silence. So I don't know. I said, call him right now. Again, this is all from me having an orgasm and being like, hey, we need to do this. So Gerald calls Clint and Clint picks up the phone. And he said, well, obviously you're out of your 30 days of silence. He's like, I just finished. He said, hey, Allison, which is what I was going by at the time, just, have this download that we're supposed to go to California with you, something to do with Michael Beckwith. And he paused for a moment and he said, that's really interesting. He's like, I'm actually at the airport right now about to board a plane to California. They just opened the borders and I was going to come to Utah after and surprise you, but I'm on my way there. And he said, but one problem, I don't know Michael Beckwith. And we're like, okay, whatever, kind of ended the call. I'm like, that was weird. Why would I get that? Well, about a day later, Clinton calls and he says, you'll never believe what happened. And we said, what? He said, I, went to go eat lunch with my friend after I landed. She said I could stay at her house in Malibu, that nobody would be there. And she was going to stay somewhere else. And I drove up there and someone was filming like a YouTube video on the front lawn. And guess who it was? It was Michael Beckwith and his partner Lee, and she needed some healing. Anyway, we end up there 2 weeks later from this interaction, and Clint gets invited back. And he said, I think, my brother and sister-in-law need to come. We end up in California having dinner with Michael Beckwith and invited him to keynote on the Global Healers Summit and began a beautiful relationship between him and Clint. But you just can't explain these things. Like, what in the world? And so there's so many stories like that. So I share that because I really want everybody to hear and understand that the power you have, especially as a woman, to tap into the superconscious through your sexuality is real. And and when we can release the guilt and shame. But here's what I want to really get your opinion on, Pardis, because I've been having extensive conversations with many just hugely well-known women in the world of esoterics and academia and everything. And so there's this idea that I've been developing around this, and I want to get your take on it, which is that this, we'll call it the unconscious male patriarchy. Do you think that's fair? Not as in man or female, but unconscious male patriarchy, this idea that there's something in charge that's telling you what to do with your body and trying to control you, whether your religion or culture, is fed by fear. And this is what I mean, is that the more we fear that that unconscious male patriarchy, whatever is representing that, the more we're afraid. So think about religions that are driven by guilt and shame or punishment. You have regimes and you're going to get punished if you don't this. The more we fear it, the bigger it becomes. how do we not fear it? And this is my question for you, because we're talking about stepping out of guilt and shame, but I think we have to add fear in, because I think really I really downloaded this the other day. I was talking with a friend of mine who does really, really big stuff in the film industry, and she has her own production studio and everything. And she was talking about this, and it really struck me that the more we fear this energy that's being represented by whatever of the unconscious male patriarchy, the bigger it gets. So how do we step out of that fear? What do we do? What did you see these women do?
I mean, I think, and you're absolutely right. I mean, when they would say like, we don't have tools, guilt and shame, but fear was right there too. And I think the first step is exactly what you're saying, is like naming it, and naming like, okay, what is this about? Initially, the sexual revolution, it was about resisting oppression. And then instead of just being in a space of critique, people got into a space of curiosity and was like, well, why are there all these rules where like, if you have premarital sex, you will be killed, dead by stoning, right? I mean, like,
Are you
people,
was this wait, hold on. This
yeah,
was in the 90s? Like you would get
in the 2000s
in
in
2000,
Iran,
you would get killed.
yes, extramarital sex,
I mean, I've
yes,
heard
right.
about this, but I guess I didn't actually realize it was, yeah, that's okay.
The stakes are so high, and women talked about, because so things like alcohol are also illegal. Being like partying was illegal. So having men and women together, like in a space at a party without veils on, like I would be at a party, and then the morality police, which is an arm of the police, would raid the party and cart all of us off to jail, right? Just for being, men and women in mixed company. Okay. Without like a headscarf on. Going into the university, there were guards at the gates. And if you were walking in with red lipstick on, they would slash your lips with a razor. If you had red nail polish or toe polish, they would dip your hands in buckets of cockroaches. So what did these women do? They flipped the script. They're like, you're afraid of us? We're going to use that. So I'm going to give you an example of how they use their bodies. They're like, we're going to use our bodies our way to speak back to you. And so just like a very tragic example. And then now what we see in Iran today is like the regime, which is one of, the world's most elusive enemies, they are being pushed back on by women who are like in their bodies, who have like what you're saying, like had these downloads and these unlocks through sex. That's like that has now become the greatest weapon. But I'm going to give you an example. I call it the summer of the cockroaches. So one hot July in 2004, all of the women, because we have these underground women's networks, all the women got together and they were like, oh, I see. If we couldn't come out wearing open-toed shoes with nail polish or toe polish, which I'm sorry, but in like 115-degree heat, like, you've lived in Phoenix. Like imagine if you couldn't go out in Phoenix without like your flip, like without open, like you had to wear socks and like that's just not acceptable, right? Because they're so threatened by the sensuality of a woman's toes. Like that's such a threat, right? They're so afraid, to your point. So they decided that on the same day, 1 July, on the same day, every woman was going to go out wearing open-toed shoes and hands painted, nail polish and toe polish. And they were like, there aren't enough cockroaches in all of Iran to take all of us in. And they were right. They were right. And everybody came out, and yeah, the first 100, 200 got arrested, had their hands dipped, whatever. But then they couldn't do anything about it. And so everyone was like, you're just going to have to deal with our feet and our toes. And so after that, like that's significant. And it was the same with the headscarf, when in the 80s, when Khomeini first came to power, you had to wear the headscarf so tight here. They called the sexual revolution the millimeter revolution, because it was like millimeter by millimeter. They were pushing it back. And they're like, look at our hair, look at our make, like, we're going to name your fear. We're going to own our bodies, and we're going to actually use what you're most afraid of against you. And I really marveled at their courage, because, Like, they could have been like, people are like, okay, is wearing red lipstick really people talked about, there's that book, Lipstick Jihad. People are like, is wearing red lipstick really that big a deal? Maybe it's just a fashion choice. And I'm like, it is a political statement when the stakes are so high that you could get a razor that slashes your lips, that the fact that you still choose to get up and put that red lipstick on, like, that is you walking without fear. That's to walk without fear, right? That is you saying, I know my power, I know my body, and I'm going to show you my body, right? And you're not going to take away my sensuality. I believe my toes are beautiful with and without, nail polish. I believe, I am going to do what I want to do, and I am going to feel into being a woman. I'm not going to let you erase me by putting, and it's not the case that for some people they feel liberated wearing the veil. So I'm not, there's no statement on that. This was just for the women who felt erased by it. Not, and not all women do. And I want to be very clear to make that distinction. But for they wanted it to be a choice. They're like, look, sometimes maybe I want to wear it, but sometimes I don't. But the more important thing is the larger kind of role of women and the larger role of sex. If premarital or sex outside of marriage is going to be illegal, that is a problem because that takes away choice.
Yeah. Well, wow, there's like this whole time we've been talking, I have full body goosebumps. But one of the things that I really want to make note of was the power of the collective. And I think this is where real change happens. And it's also where we're creating a new dynamic because for millennia, women have had to turn on each other through the witch trials, even the 80s, climbing the corporate ladder here in America. You're in America climbing the corporate ladder. Women were competing, turning against each other. Even with sex, now it's like, oh, she's more beautiful. I need to be more skinny. But this comparison that created competition. But what is the power of a collective group when they say, hey, you know what? We want something different. And I think it's valuable to note there were some women that did get punished for it, but they were willing to do it because they knew it would make a difference. And why would it make a difference? Because there were enough people willing to do it. And this is really, I think, one of the keys to overcoming the fear that has been instilled in us around how we get to use our body and our sexuality. And we all have it. There are some women that grew up in really open, households and freedom and whatever, but they've experienced rape, and so there's a fear around that because their choice was taken away from them. There's women that grew up in, really like constrained religious. There's been so many ways in which our bodies have been used against us, even the media, and saying this is how you need to look or you aren't good enough. But it's when we all just say enough is enough. We just aren't going to do it anymore. We aren't going to play your game. And that's how we get out of this matrix of the unconscious male patriarchy. And yeah, it's just I want to make one note too. I was really glad to hear this because I grew up LDS. They just announced, LDS women are encouraged to wear garments, men and women, and they just came out with a sleeveless version of the garment. So for the first time, LDS women can wear sleeveless things, and it was more about the heat and the humidity, whatever. But I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like even the religions are fighting because there's pushback. And maybe they would say it's for a different reason, but I think it's because enough people were like, okay, enough's enough. We're living somewhere that's 115 degrees and we want to be able to not have our armpits covered. So
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that your point about the collective, right? It's like what you're saying. It's got to be everybody being like that this is enough. And I think this comes back to the superconscious actually, because one of the most potent aspects for me of like the meditative work and the spiritual work, that people like you and I do now, and finding our spiritual alchemy. One of the most important things that I always get from meditation or even when we do like a group sound healing is, as we sort of meditate, we enter this unitary field of consciousness and we start to actually tune in to each other, and we start to like we all, the thinking mind understands it, but we start to embody this idea that we're all one. And so until we're all free, right? No one is free. And, one of the things that gave me a lot of hope and inspiration is that as the sexual revolution, it was certainly led by women, and as it has, and we've been watching it. I mean, you like these women in Iran, like they were on the cover of Time Mag. They were woman of the person of the year was like the women of Iran, like a year or two ago, because they're kind of going forward. And but the thing that I've always been inspired by is that the men are right there, like, yes, right with them. And there was a period, just after the Green Movement, in 2009, and then even during, a little bit further into the Middle East in the Arab Spring, you saw men wearing the veil in solidarity with women, being like, we all need to be free. And so I do want to call out these men, because they were like, not just allies, but they were like on the front lines. Many of them were going to jail, and I think it's because as we access the superconscious, that comes back to that dance between the superconscious and sex. As we access that, we realize that we're all one. And so all of our liberation is actually tied up in each other.
Yeah, what a beautiful concept. And I love that you brought that up. And I think it's really important too, as we're talking about being one, not to get caught up in the battle of the sexes or anything like that, because when, even the unconscious male patriarchy has this label on it because it's more of a masculine energy, but all of us have those masculine energy, and there are amazing men that are fighting for this cause, and there are women that are in the wounded masculine that are probably, adding into the fear and contributing to this unconscious patriarchy. But um yeah, I think you really bring up a good point. And I think for as we've been talking, I've been thinking about, like, what is the thing that we can all do, that we can all do to help really advance this sexual revolution, if you will, this ability for all of us to be able to do what we want with our own bodies, and especially for women, because this has been denied us for such a long time. And the one thing that keeps coming over and over to me, and you did this in your book, is number one, get curious. You went over to Iran, you got curious, and you really started asking questions and got to know the women. And then second of all, after you get curious, really start having conversations. Have conversations with people. What does this mean? Like, curious about, why am I feeling this way? Why is this group of people feeling this way? Why is this happening still? Now let's start a conversation about it. And then the collective. Now let's get together as a collective and do something about it. So we have curiosity, that we create conversations, and then we all come together collectively to create a movement. In your Q&A that you were talking about earlier, that I was talking about earlier on in the call, where you were sharing some of the other stuff that you've done too, something really hit me, and it hit me at Burning Man again this year. There's this big sign that said, "I'm fine," in the middle of the desert. It was made from all the shot up signs from Israel and the war that's going on there now. And all these signs were basically glued together to make the sign that says, "I'm fine." And it made a real statement. And that is one of the things that I've noticed in myself is, I don't like conflict. And so I distance myself. Or I don't like to think about the bad things that are going on in the world. So I don't get curious about them. But what is that curiosity costing not only me, but what is it costing the collective? Like, what would happen if we all just got a little more curious about what's going on and why it's happening? And we were courageous enough to have the conversations. And then we were able to join the collective movement where we all become one. And so I think that would be my call to action for myself from this conversation and from the things that I've been learning recently. So, and I just really want to honor the work that you've done, because I know that wasn't easy for you to write that book. And I know that there was some, pushback
High
from people.
price. Yeah. Paid a high price. But, it's to your point, staying in curiosity. I, from there, when, I got exiled from Iran after that, I spent 6 years doing it, wrote the book, then got exiled, and, began working in the Arab world and the Arab Spring, and like all of, the kind of, there was all of that like slut shaming, and that was so much part of the Arab Spring. So getting really curious there, and then getting just like staying in that curiosity. It's so funny you mentioned that, and you mentioned Burning Man. I've been wanting to go to Burning Man for like, gosh, 2 decades. And the reason that, is always something came up, something came up, something came up. And the reason that this year I was like, this is my year, is they announced the theme, which was Curiouser and Curiouser, right? That was the theme of Burning Man this year. And I was like, the universe is speaking. I hear you. It's time. And there were like really hard moments for me at Burning Man, like there are for everybody, and I think just that theme was like in the air. And so just allowing myself to even get curious about like, why am I having a breakdown right now? Like, why am I crying in the middle of the playa because I lost my cotton candy? Like, like, why am I having this moment right now? Right. And just being able to get curious. And there was that another sign on the playa for me, and it was like, getting curious yet. And I was like, yes, okay, message received. But the power of the collective, you definitely feel that at Burning Man, right? Like I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways, one of the biggest gifts from our camp that you and Gerald lead is like that we could come in to dinner, we could come in, to the temple, and people were like, I've been crying all day. And I'm like, oh, you too? Like it was like, we are one, like we are a collective, and how do we harness the beauty of that and the power of that collective to get curious together, and then to like lift up and to like lift everybody up into the super conscious to kind of elevate the vibrational frequency, and then the like healing work that we need individually, but that our world so desperately needs.
Yes, and amen. It's time to co-elevate, coexist. Let's get curious. And thank you so much for all the work that you've done. You are really such an inspiration to me. And I know you have several books out, but the specific one we talked about today, which is again, Passionate Uprising, Iran's sexual revolution. It's on pardismahdavi.com. Is that where people go to get the book?
Yep, you can get it www.pardismahdavi.com. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it anywhere. And I also talk more about the sexual revolution in my latest book, which is called Book of Queens. And it's about the many queens in Afghanistan and Iran who actually, it's the untold true story of the Middle Eastern women who helped fight the war on terror. When we talk about the war on terror, we talk about the men, the Green Berets, and they were fabulous and they were so amazing. They were. I mean, I was right there with them. But like they were using these horses, and who trained those horses? It was the women. And it was the women who knew the terrain. And it was this like group of all female warriors who had been beating back the Taliban for years. And I just like, I love that, you've got this, it just flips the script completely.
Wow.
It's Book of Queens.
Okay. Well, I can't wait. Book of Queens. And so thankful again that you came on here, and really, really glad that I know you. Like, I'm so glad to have you in my life, and really excited that I got to introduce you to all of our friends here on Psychedelic Sex and the Superconscious. So everybody go and get Pardis's book. Like really, she is so fabulous, and I love you so much. And until next time, love you. Bye.
Thank you, legendary explorers, for joining us on this cosmic journey today.
Your curiosity fuels our exploration of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
If you're hungry for more, dive into our website and connect with us on social media. All the links are in the show notes.
And stay tuned for our next mind-expanding episode. We can't wait to talk to you again in our next adventure.
Until then, remember, this is your life. So,
make it legendary.